My name is Marcus. I'm 24, and I live in Riverside, California, in one of those cookie-cutter apartment complexes where every balcony looks identical, and the pool always has that one broken tile nobody ever fixes. I work at a tech startup, downtown, writing code for an app that helps people find parking spots. Not exactly changing the world, but it pays the bills and keeps me in energy drinks and takeout containers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer I met Helena Martinez was scorching hot, even by Southern California standards. The kind of heat that makes asphalt soft and turns car steering wheels into torture devices. I'd been living at Sunset Gardens Apartments for about 8 months, long enough to recognize most faces, but not long enough to actually know anyone's name. That's just how it is in places like this. You nod, maybe exchange pleasantries about the weather, or complain about the broken elevator, but mostly everyone keeps to themselves. Helena lived in the unit directly above mine, 2B to my 1B. I'd seen her around the complex plenty of times. Always impeccably dressed. Always carrying herself with this kind of confidence that seemed to cut through the muggy air like a blade. She had this striking silver hair that she wore in a sleek bob, and these deep brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Not in a nosy way, but more like someone who'd learned to read people the way most of us read street signs. She drove a pristine white BMW that always looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor, which stood out pretty dramatically in our parking lot full of dented Hondas and sun-faded pickup trucks. I'd wondered what someone like her was doing in a place like this. But then again, Riverside real estate prices make strange bedfellows for us all. The first time we actually spoke was on a Tuesday morning in late July. I was heading out to grab coffee before work when I heard the distinct sound of grocery bags tearing. You know that ripping noise that happens right before your eggs hit the pavement and your day officially goes to hell? That sound. I looked over and saw Helena standing next to her BMW, staring down at what used to be a paper bag and was now a scattered collection of produce, canned goods, and what looked like the remains of a very expensive bottle of olive oil spreading across the hot asphalt. "Need some help?" I called out, already walking over before she could answer. She looked up at me and I caught something in her expression. Not embarrassment exactly, but maybe surprise that someone had noticed, or cared enough to offer assistance. "I would appreciate that very much," she said, and her voice had this slight accent I couldn't quite place. Not heavy, just enough to add character to her words. We spent the next 10 minutes salvaging what we could and cleaning up the olive oil mess. She had this way of moving that was precise, economical, no wasted motion, everything purposeful. Even cleaning up spilled groceries, she maintained this elegance that made me feel clumsy in comparison. "I'm Marcus," I said as we finished up, wiping oil off a can of tomatoes with napkins from her glove compartment. "Helena," she replied, accepting the rescued can. "Helena Martinez, and thank you. You've saved me from having to explain to the grocery store why I need to buy another bottle of $30 olive oil. $30 olive oil. That should have been my first clue that Helena Martinez was operating on a different level than the rest of us at Sunset Gardens." "No problem," I said. "Happens to the best of us." She smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that makes you forget what you were planning to do next. "Does it?" I have to say, this doesn't usually happen to me. I'm typically more careful. There was something in the way she said careful that made it sound like she was talking about more than just grocery bags. Over the next few weeks, we developed what you might call a neighborly relationship. She'd wave when she saw me in the parking lot. Sometimes we'd end up checking our mail at the same time and exchange a few words about the heat or the complex's perpetually broken air conditioning in the lobby. Nothing deep, nothing that crossed any lines, but enough that I started looking forward to these random encounters. Helena had this way of asking questions that made you want to tell her things. Not in a pushy way, but more like she was genuinely interested in your answers. She asked about my work, about how I'd ended up in Riverside, about whether I liked living alone. Normal questions, but coming from her, they felt more significant somehow. I learned that she worked in consulting. She was always vague about the specifics, but from the way she dressed and the hours she kept, it was clearly something that paid well and demanded a lot of her time. She'd often leave early in the morning in crisp business suits and come home late in the evening. usually carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. The first time she asked for help with groceries was on a Saturday afternoon in early August. I was coming back from the gym, still sweaty and probably not smelling my best, when I saw her struggling with what looked like a week's worth of shopping bags. "Marcus," she called out as I was unlocking my mailbox. "Would you mind giving me a hand? I may have overestimated my carrying capacity." This time she'd learned her lesson about paper bags. Everything was in sturdy, reusable bags with reinforced handles. But there were a lot of them, and she was balancing them while trying to fish her keys out of her purse. "Of course," I said, grabbing half the bags. "Stocking up for the apocalypse?" She laughed. "Something like that. I don't like having to make multiple trips to the store. Efficiency, you know." As we walked toward the elevator, which was actually working for once, I couldn't help but notice what was in the bags I was carrying. This wasn't your typical grocery run. There were ingredients I'd never heard of, wines with labels in languages I couldn't read, and what looked like enough food to feed a small dinner party. "Big plans for the weekend?" I asked as we waited for the elevator. "Not particularly," she said, but there was something evasive about her tone. "I just like to be prepared." Her apartment, when she unlocked the door, was nothing like what I'd expected. From the outside, all the units in our complex looked the same. But Helena had transformed hers into something that belonged in a completely different zip code. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and expensive-looking materials. The walls were covered with what looked like original artwork, and there were fresh flowers on every surface that could hold a vase. "This is incredible," I said, setting the bags down on her granite kitchen counter. "It's like you're living in a different building." "Thank you," she said, already starting to unpack groceries with practiced efficiency. "I believe your environment shapes your mindset. I refuse to let my circumstances dictate my standards." I helped her put things away, trying not to stare too obviously at the contents of her refrigerator, which looked like something out of a gourmet magazine. Everything was organized, labeled, perfectly arranged. Even her condiment collection was color-coordinated. "Can I offer you something to drink?" she asked as we finished. "Coffee? Water? Something stronger?" It was barely 3 in the afternoon, but something about Helena made day drinking seem perfectly reasonable. "What do you have in mind?" She opened a cabinet that I swear hadn't been there a second ago. It was so seamlessly integrated into the kitchen design, and pulled out a bottle of wine that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I have a very nice Burgundy that's been waiting for the right occasion." "And helping with groceries qualifies as the right occasion?" "Kindness always qualifies," she said, already reaching for wine glasses. "Besides, I don't often have company. It's nice to have someone to share it with." The wine was incredible. Smooth and complex in ways that made my usual 2-buck chuck taste like grape juice. We sat on her balcony, which somehow had a better view than mine despite being in the same building, and talked about everything and nothing. She asked about my family, my college experience, and my plans for the future, the kinds of questions that sound casual but require real answers. I found myself telling her things I hadn't shared with anyone, about how I'd moved to California without really knowing what I wanted to do, about feeling like I was drifting through life without a clear direction, about sometimes wondering if I was wasting my 20s on safe choices instead of taking real risks. "Risk is interesting," she said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Most people think they want adventure, but what they really want is the feeling of adventure without any actual danger. True risk requires accepting that you might lose something valuable." "What's the biggest risk you've ever taken?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the complex's sad little swimming pool, where a handful of kids were splashing around under the watchful eye of their parents. "Starting over," she said finally. "Leaving everything I knew and building something completely new. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." "Was it worth it?" "Ask me in a few years," she said. But she was smiling when she said it. By the time I left her apartment, the sun was setting, and I was definitely feeling the effects of the wine. As I stood up to go, Helena touched my arm lightly. "Marcus," she said, and there was something different in her voice. Softer, more vulnerable than I'd heard before. "I want you to know that I appreciate this. The help, the company, the conversation. I don't It's been a while since I've had someone to talk to like this. Anytime, I said, and I meant it. Really. Anytime you need help with groceries or want someone to share expensive wine with, just knock. She smiled, but there was something almost sad about it. You might regret saying that. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walking back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Helena Martinez was becoming more than just the elegant woman who lived upstairs. She was becoming someone I genuinely wanted to know better. The grocery trips became a regular thing after that. Every week or two, Helena would text me. She'd gotten my number under the pretense that it was practical for neighbors to be able to reach each other, asking if I was available to help her bring up her shopping. I always said yes. Each time, I'd end up staying for a drink, and each time, our conversations went a little deeper. Helena had this gift for making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, even when she was clearly the one with the fascinating stories. She'd traveled extensively, spoke at least 3 languages fluently, and had opinions about everything from architecture to wine to geopolitics that made me feel like I was getting a master class in sophistication. But she was also careful. I started to notice how she'd deflect certain questions, change the subject when conversations got too specific about her past or her work. She'd share philosophical thoughts and general experiences, but concrete details were harder to come by. "You're very mysterious, you know," I told her one afternoon as we sat in her living room, listening to jazz music I'd never heard, but that sounded like it probably cost more than my car. "Am I?" she asked, genuinely seeming surprised. "I don't mean to be. I suppose I'm just a private person. There's private, and then there's, I don't know, like you're guarding state secrets." She laughed, but it sounded a little forced. "Maybe I'm just not that interesting." "Right," I said. "The woman who lives like she's in a penthouse while paying apartment rent, who drinks wine, that costs more than most people's weekly grocery budget, who somehow makes helping with groceries feel like the highlight of my week. Totally boring." Something shifted in her expression then. She set down her wine glass and looked at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Marcus," she said slowly, "how old do you think I am?" It was such an unexpected question that I fumbled for an answer. I don't know. Does it matter?" "I'm 56, she said, watching my face carefully for a reaction. Honestly, I was surprised. I would have guessed mid-40s at most. Helena had this timeless quality that made age seem irrelevant. But 56 meant she was more than twice my age. "Okay," I said, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. "You're 24, she continued, "which means that if anyone saw us together, really together, they'd have opinions. Lots of opinions." "About what?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the parking lot where her BMW sat next to my beat-up Honda Civic, like some kind of automotive metaphor for class differences. "About what a woman my age is doing spending time with someone your age. About what you might be getting out of it. About what I might be getting out of it." She turned back to me. "People talk, Marcus, and they rarely assume the best about situations like ours." "Situations like ours?" I repeated. "What situation?" "We're neighbors. We're friends. We share groceries, wine, and conversation. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing," she said quietly. "That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with it. But that won't stop people from thinking there is." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing by the window. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes that she usually hid with careful makeup, the slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she carried more stress than she let on. "Helena," I said, "I don't care what people think." She turned to look at me then, and there was something in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear, or some combination of both. "You might," she said softly. "Someday, you might care very much." "Why would I?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her weighing something in her mind, deciding whether to say whatever she was thinking. "Because," she said finally, "you're worth the whispers." The way she said it made my stomach flip. There was weight behind those words, meaning that went beyond simple friendship or neighborly kindness. We were standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that seemed to capture everything sophisticated about her. "Helena, I should let you go," she said quickly, stepping back and breaking whatever spell had settled over us. "It's getting late, and you probably have plans." I didn't have plans. I never had plans on Saturday evenings beyond ordering pizza and watching Netflix. But something in her tone told me that pushing the moment would be a mistake. "Okay," I said. "But Helena? Whatever people might whisper about, whatever they might think, it doesn't change anything for me. You're the most interesting person I've met since moving here. Maybe ever. And if being your friend means dealing with some gossip, then that's a pretty small price to pay." She smiled then, and it was different from her usual careful, controlled expressions. This smile was genuine, unguarded, and maybe a little bit sad. "You say that now," she said, "but you don't know what you're saying yes to." As I walked back to my apartment that night, her words echoed in my head. "You don't know what you're saying yes to." It sounded like a warning, but it also sounded like a promise. And despite the voice in the back of my head telling me that I was getting into something complicated, I found myself hoping she was right. The Monday after Helena told me I was worth the whispers, everything felt different. Not dramatically different. She still waved when she saw me in the parking lot. I still nodded back. But there was this undercurrent of awareness between us that hadn't existed before. Like we were both pretending not to notice an elephant that had taken up permanent residence in the hallway between our apartments. I caught myself listening for her footsteps above me, the sound of her high heels on the hardwood floors she'd somehow managed to install in a rental apartment. The building's thin walls meant I could track her movements, the morning routine that started at exactly 6:15 a.m., the evening return that varied anywhere from 7 p.m. to well past midnight, depending on whatever mysterious consulting work kept. Her busy Wednesday evening, I was on my balcony trying to make sense of a particularly frustrating piece of code when I heard her car pull into the parking lot. From my vantage point, I could see her BMW slide into its usual spot with the kind of precision that suggested she'd done this exact maneuver thousands of times. But something was different tonight. Instead of her usual efficient exit from the car, Helena sat behind the wheel for several minutes, just staring straight ahead. I found myself watching her, wondering what was going through her mind. Even from a distance, I could see tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the steering wheel like she was anchoring herself to something solid. Finally, she got out, but her movements lacked their usual fluid confidence. She fumbled with her keys, dropped her briefcase, and when she bent to pick it up, I could see her hands were shaking. Without really thinking about it, I found myself downstairs in the parking lot. "Helena, everything okay?" She straightened up quickly, immediately composing herself with the kind of practiced ease that told me she'd done this before, hidden whatever was bothering her behind a mask of perfect control. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was steady, professional. "Fine, just a long day. You know how it is." But I could see something flickering in her eyes that contradicted her words. Whatever had happened today, it hadn't been just a long day. "Want to talk about it?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could almost see her internal debate playing out. The part of her that wanted to maintain distance, warring, with whatever part had been sitting alone in her car trying to pull herself together. "I could use a drink," she said finally, "and maybe some company." This time, when we got to her apartment, Helena didn't bother with the careful ritual of opening expensive wine and arranging everything perfectly. She went straight to what I was beginning to realize was a very well-stocked bar cart and poured 2 glasses of something amber-colored that burned going down but left a warm, smoky aftertaste. "Scotch," she said, noticing my expression. "Single, malt, aged longer than you've been alive." I figured tonight called for something stronger than wine. We settled on her couch, but instead of her usual composed posture, legs crossed, spine straight, every movement deliberate, Helena curled into the corner like she was trying to make herself smaller. The contrast was jarring. "Bad day at the office?" I asked, trying for lightness. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could say that. Do you ever have moments where you realize that everything you thought you knew about your life was wrong? Like when I discovered my college girlfriend was seeing 3 other guys and told everyone I was practice dating? That got a real laugh out of her." Not exactly what I meant, but yes, that general feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you. She took a sip of scotch, winced slightly, and continued. I had a meeting today. Someone from my past. Someone I thought I'd never see again. It's complicated. Good complicated or bad complicated. The kind that makes you question every decision you've made for the past 5 years, she said. The kind that reminds you that no matter how far you run, certain things have a way of catching up with you. There was something in her tone that made me put down my glass and give her my full attention. This wasn't just about a difficult client or office politics. This was personal, and whatever it was, it had shaken her badly. "Helena," I said carefully, "are you in some kind of trouble?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Vulnerability. Raw, unguarded vulnerability that made her seem suddenly much younger and much older at the same time. "Would it matter if I were?" she asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. If I told you that my life is complicated in ways that you can't imagine. If I told you that knowing me might not be the simple thing you think it is. Would it matter to you?" I thought about it for exactly half a second. No. Just like that? No questions, no demands for details, no walking away while you still can. "Helena, I'm not walking away. Whatever this is, whatever's going on, we're friends. That doesn't come with conditions." She stared at me for so long that I started to wonder if I'd said something wrong. Then, without warning, she leaned over and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was urgent, almost desperate, like she was trying to communicate something she couldn't put into words. For a moment, I was too surprised to respond. Then my brain caught up with what was happening, and I kissed her back. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Helena's carefully styled hair was mussed, her lipstick smudged, and she looked more real than I'd ever seen her. "I shouldn't have done that," she said, but she didn't move away. "Why not?" "Because you're 24 and I'm 56. Because people will talk. Because my life is complicated in ways that could hurt you. Because—" I kissed her this time, cutting off her list of reasons why whatever was happening between us was a bad idea. When we separated, I kept my face close to hers. "Helena," I said, "I don't care about any of that." "You should," she whispered. "You really should." But even as she said it, her hand was still resting on my chest, and she wasn't pulling away. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me what's so complicated about your life that you think it's going to scare me off." She was quiet for a long time, and I could see her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to decide how much truth she could afford to share. "I used to be married," she said finally, "to a man named David. We lived in Chicago. Beautiful house, successful careers, the whole picture-perfect life. David was a real estate developer, very wealthy, very connected. We were together for 15 years. She paused, took another sip of scotch, and I waited. David had business partners, men who seemed legitimate on the surface, but who were involved in things that weren't entirely legal. Money laundering, mostly, through real estate transactions. I didn't know about it at first. I was naive enough to believe that love meant trust, and trust meant not asking too many questions about your husband's work. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "But you found out." "I found out. And when I did, I had a choice to make. I could pretend I didn't know, keep living the comfortable life I'd built, and hope that David's associates would always see me as an asset rather than a liability. Or I could do something about it." "What did you do?" "I gathered evidence. Financial records, meeting notes, recorded conversations. Anything I could get my hands on. It took me 2 years, and David never suspected a thing. He thought I was just the devoted wife who managed the household and looked pretty at dinner parties." Helena's voice had taken on a flat, matter-of-fact tone that was somehow more chilling than if she'd been emotional about it. "Then I turned everything over to the FBI. The words hung in the air between us. I tried to process what she was telling me. This elegant woman who worried about $30 olive oil and arranged flowers in crystal vases had been some kind of undercover informant against her own husband. What happened? David went to prison. So did most of his associates. The whole network collapsed. She looked directly at me, and I disappeared. Disappeared? Witness protection, essentially. New name, new background, new life. The government relocated me, gave me a clean identity, enough money to start over. Somewhere safe. That's how Helena Martinez came to exist. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything I thought I knew about her. Helena Martinez isn't your real name? No. And before you ask, I can't tell you what my real name was. Some secrets have to stay buried. The scotch wasn't helping me process this information any faster. So the person from your past who showed up today, someone who knew me before. Someone who shouldn't have been able to find me. Her hands were shaking again, just slightly. The whole point of starting over was that my old life was supposed to stay dead. But apparently, some people have longer memories than the government anticipated. Are you in danger? She was quiet, for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Helena, this is what I meant when I said you don't know what you're saying yes to, she said, standing up and walking to the window. This is why people my age don't get involved with people your age. It's not just about appearances or judgment or inappropriate relationships. It's about the fact that my life comes with risks that you never signed up for. I joined her at the window, looking out at the same parking lot where we'd had our first real conversation over spilled groceries. Everything looked exactly the same, but somehow the world felt fundamentally different. What if I want to sign up for them? She turned to stare at me. Marcus, you have no idea what you're saying. Then explain it to me. Help me understand. Understand what? That the woman you've been having wine with and helping with groceries is essentially living under an assumed identity? That there are people out there who might hurt you just for being associated with me? That everything you think you know about me is built on a foundation of lies? It's not lies, I said. The Helena I know. The one who makes incredible conversation and drinks expensive wine and kisses like the world is ending. She's real. The rest of it, whatever happened before, that's just history. History has a way of becoming present, tense when you least expect it, she said grimly. We stood there in silence for a while, both of us processing what had just happened. The kiss, the revelation, the fundamental shift in everything we thought we understood about each other. So, what happens now? I asked finally. Now you have a decision to make, Helena said. You can walk away, go back to your apartment, pretend this conversation never happened, and continue living your uncomplicated 24-year-old life. Or you can stay, knowing that everything just got a lot more complicated. What do you want me to do? She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I want you to be smart. I want you to protect yourself. I want you to understand that caring about me might not be the safe choice. That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she said, I want you to stay. The next few hours passed in a strange kind of suspended reality. We talked more about her old life, about the witness protection program, about the careful balance she'd been maintaining between staying hidden and staying sane. She told me about the loneliness of living under an assumed identity, about how exhausting it was to always be careful, always be aware, always be ready to disappear again if necessary. The hardest part, she said as we sat on her couch with the bottle of scotch between us, isn't the fear. You get used to being afraid. It's the isolation. When you can't tell anyone who you really are, when every relationship is built on a foundation of half-truths, you start to forget what real connection feels like. Is that what this is? I asked. Real connection? I think so, she said. Which is why it's so dangerous. By the time I left her apartment that night, the sun was starting to rise. We hadn't talked about what the kiss meant, or where we went from here, or what we were going to do about the fact that someone from her past had found her. We'd just talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they're trying to memorize each other's voices. As I walked back to my apartment, I realized that Helena had been right about one thing. I really hadn't known what I was saying yes to when I told her I didn't care about the complications in her life. But now that I did know, now that I understood at least some of what she was carrying, I found that my answer hadn't changed. Whatever was coming next, whatever those complications were going to look like, I was in. Maybe that made me naive or stupid, or hopelessly out of my depth. But for the first time since moving to California, I felt like I was part of something that mattered, even if that something might get me killed. The next 2 weeks passed like I was living in two different worlds simultaneously. During the day, I went through the motions of my normal life, coding parking apps, grabbing lunch at the same sandwich shop, complaining about the broken elevator, with other tenants. But underneath that routine normalcy was this constant electric awareness that everything had changed. Helena and I developed a careful dance around each other. We didn't talk about the kiss, didn't mention her revelation about witness protection, didn't acknowledge that we'd crossed some invisible line that neither of us quite knew how to navigate. Instead, we fell into a pattern of small gestures and loaded glances that felt more intimate than any conversation we'd had before. She started leaving things for me. Nothing dramatic. A cup of coffee by my door in the morning with a note that said, "Thought you might need this," a bottle of wine with 4 emergencies written on the label, a book of poetry with certain passages underlined in pencil. I reciprocated by fixing small things around her apartment that she mentioned in passing. A loose cabinet handle, a squeaky door hinge, a burnt-out bulb in her hallway fixture that required a ladder to reach. We were courting each other through maintenance and caffeine, and somehow it felt more romantic than any traditional relationship I'd ever had. The facade cracked on a Thursday evening when I came home to find Helena sitting on the steps outside our building, still in her business, clothes but looking disheveled in a way that immediately put me on alert. Her usually perfect hair was falling out of its pins, and she was staring at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. "Helena?" I sat down beside her on the concrete steps. "What's wrong?" She held up her phone. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. "Coffee tomorrow, 2 p.m., Pier 39 Cafe. Don't make me ask twice." "The person from your past?" I asked. She nodded. "His name is Vincent Reyes. He was David's business partner. The smart one who managed to avoid getting caught when the FBI rounded everyone else up. I testified against him, but they never had enough evidence to make charges stick. The name hit me like cold water. Vincent Reyes. I'd heard that name before, but I couldn't place where. "Helena, you can't meet him. If he's trying to find you, if he's making threats, it's not a threat," she said quietly. "It's a summons. Vincent doesn't make idle requests. If I don't show up tomorrow, he'll escalate. And escalation with Vincent means people get hurt. Then we call the FBI. Your handler, whoever monitors your case, Marcus." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were hollow. "There is no handler anymore. My case was officially closed 3 years ago. As far as the government is concerned, Helena Martinez is just another citizen living her quiet life in Riverside. The protection program worked. Everyone assumed I'd disappeared permanently, so they stopped looking. Except Vincent never stopped looking." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So you're on your own?" "I've been on my own for a while. Now. I just convinced myself it was temporary." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the evening foot traffic around our complex. Families coming home from work, kids riding bikes in the courtyard, the ordinary rhythm of suburban life continuing around us while we sat there discussing federal witnesses and criminal partners like it was normal dinner conversation. "I'm coming. With you," I said finally. "Absolutely not." "Helena, Marcus, no. This isn't negotiable. Vincent is dangerous in ways you can't understand. He's not some Hollywood villain who makes dramatic speeches. He's a businessman who treats human lives like accounting entries. If he sees you as connected to me, you become a liability he needs to manage. And you think I'm just going to let you walk into that alone?" She smiled, but it was sad and tired. "You don't get to let me do anything. This is my mess, my past, my problem to handle. It stopped being just your problem the moment you told me about it. That's not how this works." "Then explain to me how it does work. Because from where I'm sitting, someone is threatening the woman I care about, and my instinct is to do something about it." The words hung between us. I hadn't meant to say it quite like that. Hadn't meant to put that label on whatever was happening between us. But there it was. The woman I care about. Helena stared at me for a long moment. "You care about me," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Yeah, I do." "Even knowing what you know now?" "Especially knowing what I know now." She leaned against me then, her head on my shoulder, and for a moment we just sat there on the steps like any other couple dealing with life's complications. Except our complications involved federal witnesses and potential threats from organized crime figures, which wasn't exactly standard relationship territory. "Vincent will want something," she said eventually. "He wouldn't expose himself by making contact unless he needed something from me. The question is what, and whether I can give it to him without compromising what's left of my safety." "What could he possibly want from you after all this time?" "Information, probably. Names, locations, details about the network that I might not have shared with the FBI. Or maybe something more personal. Revenge, closure, the satisfaction of knowing he found me when everyone else gave up." The way she said it made my skin crawl. "Helena, please don't meet him. We can figure out another way. There is no other way." She sat up, and her voice took on that tone of calm resolution that I was learning meant she'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. "Vincent found me, which means he knows where I live, where I work, probably where I buy groceries and get my hair cut. Running isn't an option anymore. The only choice is to face this directly and hope I can convince him that I'm not worth the trouble. And if you can't convince him?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then we'll deal with whatever comes next." We. She'd said we. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Vincent Reyes, trying to remember where I'd heard that name before. It nagged at me like a song stuck in my head. Familiar, but just out of reach. Finally, around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. Vincent Reyes wasn't hard to find online. He maintained a carefully curated public profile. As a legitimate businessman, real estate development, import-export, several charitable foundations. His company website showed a man in his early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, the sort of person you'd trust to manage your retirement fund. But dig a little deeper, past the official bios and press releases, and a different picture emerged. News articles from Chicago, mostly from 5 or 6 years ago, mentioned his name in connection with federal investigations into money laundering. Always as a person of interest, never as someone actually charged with anything. The smart one, as Helena had said. Smart enough to keep his hands clean while other people did the dirty work. I found the article that mentioned Helena's testimony. Well, not Helena. Her real name, which I now knew but still felt wrong reading. The article was brief, clinical in its language about wire fraud and racketeering charges, but buried in the middle was a single paragraph that made my blood run cold. Federal prosecutors relied heavily on testimony from the wife of defendant David Morrison, who provided extensive documentation of financial irregularities spanning several years. Sources close to the investigation described her cooperation as essential to breaking up the network. The witness has since been relocated under federal protection. Helena had been the key witness. Not just someone who happened to stumble across information, but the person whose testimony had brought down the entire operation. Which meant Vincent Reyes had very personal reasons for wanting to find her. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd learned. Helena wasn't just a former witness hiding from generic criminals. She was the specific person responsible for destroying Vincent's business and sending his partners to prison. Whatever he wanted from her tomorrow, it wasn't going to be a polite conversation about old times. The next morning, Helena texted me at 10 a.m. Meeting moved to 3 p.m., same place. Don't worry. Don't worry. Right. I spent the day in a useless haze of anxiety, jumping every time my phone buzzed, checking news websites for stories about violent crimes in San Francisco, generally making myself crazy with scenarios I couldn't control. By 2:30, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew Helena would kill me for it, but I drove to San Francisco. Pier 39 was exactly as touristy and crowded as I'd expected. Street performers, souvenir shops, families with strollers navigating, around clusters of sea lions lounging on the docks. The cafe was small and presumably chosen because it was public enough to discourage violence, but not so busy that conversations couldn't be private. I found a spot across the street with a clear view of the cafe entrance and settled in to wait. At exactly 3 p.m., I saw Helena approach from the parking area. She was wearing a navy blue dress and heels, every inch the composed businesswoman, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from 50 yards away. She went inside, and for 20 minutes, nothing happened. I was starting to wonder if Vincent had stood her up when a black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man got out, tall, well-dressed, silver-haired. Even from a distance, I could see this was someone accustomed to being in control of situations. Vincent Reyes looked exactly like his website photos, which somehow made him more unsettling rather than less. There's something deeply disturbing about people who commit violence while maintaining the appearance of respectability. He went into the cafe and I found myself holding my breath. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Tourists wandered past my observation post, probably wondering why some guy was standing motionless on a street corner staring at a coffee shop. I didn't care. Every minute that meeting continued was another minute Helena was alone with someone who had very good reasons to want her dead. At 4:15, they came out together. This was not part of any scenario I'd imagined. Helena and Vincent walked side by side, not like adversaries but like colleagues, business partners, people who'd reached some kind of understanding. Vincent opened the passenger door of his sedan. Helena got in, and they drove away. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching the black car disappear into San Francisco traffic, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Helena hadn't been kidnapped or coerced. She'd gotten into that car voluntarily, which meant either the meeting had gone very differently than expected, or I'd fundamentally misunderstood something about the situation. My phone buzzed. A text. From Helena. Had to leave unexpectedly. Will explain later. Don't come looking for me. Don't come looking for me. The words sent ice through my veins. I drove back to Riverside in a state of barely controlled panic, running through possibilities that ranged from bad to catastrophic. Maybe Vincent had threatened someone Helena cared about. Maybe he'd offered her something she couldn't refuse. Maybe she'd agreed to go with him to protect me, or the other tenants in our building, or some random stranger who'd gotten caught in the crossfire. Or maybe I'd been wrong about everything, and Helena Martinez wasn't the person I thought she was. By the time I got back to Sunset Gardens, it was past 6 p.m. Helena's parking space was empty. Her apartment was dark. I stood outside her door for 10 minutes, debating whether to use the spare key she'd given me for emergencies, ultimately deciding that having my girlfriend voluntarily leave with a known criminal probably qualified as an emergency. Her apartment was untouched. No signs of struggle, no hurried packing, no indication that she'd been forced to leave. But there was something on her kitchen counter that hadn't been there before. A manila envelope with my name written on it in Helena's handwriting. Inside was a letter, 2 pages of her precise script, and a check for $25,000. Letter began. Marcus, if you're reading this, then Vincent's offer was more complicated than I expected, and I've had to make a choice that you're not going to understand. I sank into her kitchen chair, still holding the check, and started reading. With each paragraph, the foundations of everything I thought I knew about Helena Martinez began to crumble once again. The letter felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. I read it 3 times before the words actually registered, and, even then, I wasn't sure I understood what Helena was trying to tell me. Marcus, it began. If you're reading this, then Vincent's offer was more complicated than I expected, and I've had to make a choice that you're not going to understand. By the time you find this letter, I'll be gone, and I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you is the truth, even the parts that contradict what I told you before. Vincent didn't find me by accident. He's been watching me for months, waiting for the right moment to make contact. What I didn't tell you is that when I testified against David and his associates, I held back certain information, financial records mostly, detailing transactions, that went far beyond the network the FBI knew about. I kept copies of everything as insurance, evidence that could implicate people much more powerful than David's small-time operation. Vincent knows I have these records. More importantly, he knows that other people want them. People who would pay substantial amounts to make sure that information never sees daylight. What he offered me today wasn't a threat. It was a business proposition. There's a buyer, someone Vincent has been in contact with, who's willing to pay 7 figures for the files I've been hiding. The catch is that the sale has to happen in person, with me present to verify the authenticity of the documents. It's a one-time deal. I hand over the evidence, collect the money, and disappear permanently. New identity, new life, far away from both the criminal networks and the federal agencies that have been defining my existence for the past 5 years. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this sounds like a trap. Like Vincent is manipulating me into a situation where I'll be vulnerable. You're probably right. But here's what you don't understand. I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of living under an assumed name, tired of being afraid to care about anyone because caring makes you a target. When I met you, when we started spending time together, I realized that I wanted a normal life more than I wanted safety. I wanted to be Helena Martinez, not just play her. I wanted to wake up next to someone who knows my real name and doesn't care about my past. I wanted groceries and wine and ordinary Tuesday evenings that don't come with the weight of federal protection protocols. This deal with Vincent, if it's legitimate, gives me a chance at that life. Real freedom. Not the kind that comes with restrictions and handlers and the constant knowledge that everything could disappear if the right person decides I'm no longer worth protecting. The money in this envelope is yours, regardless of what happens. Consider it payment for services rendered, not just helping with groceries, but helping me remember what it feels like to be human, instead of just a witness in hiding. If Vincent's deal goes through, there will be more. Enough for you to quit that job you hate, travel, maybe start the business you mentioned wanting to someday. If the deal doesn't go through, well, at least you'll have something to remember me by. Don't try to find me, Marcus. Don't contact the authorities. Don't hire a private investigator. Don't do any of the heroic things you're probably considering right now. If this works out the way I hope it will, I'll contact you in a few months with details about where I've settled. If it doesn't work out, then getting involved will only put you in danger without helping me. I need you to trust me on this. I need you to believe that I know what I'm doing, even though I realize how this must look from your perspective. Most importantly, I need you to know that these past few months with you have been the most real I've felt since I left Chicago. Whatever happens next, that was worth all of it. Take care of yourself, Marcus. You deserve someone who can love you without complications. Helena P.S. There's a key taped under the kitchen sink. It opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Main Street. Box 247. If something happens to me, the contents are yours. Consider it my insurance policy for your insurance policy. I set the letter down and stared at the check again. $25,000, made out to me, signed in Helena's careful handwriting. It felt like blood money, payment for services I'd never agreed to provide, compensation for a relationship that had apparently been more complicated than I'd realized. The key was exactly where she'd said it would be, taped to the underside of her sink with medical precision. Small, brass, with a number stamped into the metal that matched what she'd written in the letter. I held it in my palm, trying to decide what to do. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong. Helena might think she was making a smart business decision, but from where I stood, it looked like she'd walked willingly into a trap set by someone who had every reason to want her dead. Vincent Reyes hadn't spent months tracking her down so he could help her get rich and disappear. He'd found her because she was the key witness who destroyed his operation, and now he had her alone, away from any protection, with a story about buyers and seven-figure deals that sounded too good to be true. But Helena's letter had been explicit. Don't try to find me. Don't contact the authorities. Don't get involved. She'd made her choice with full knowledge of the risks, and she'd asked me to respect that choice. I lasted exactly 18 hours. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to First National Bank. The safety deposit box required 2 keys, mine and the bank's, and a signature verification that took 20 minutes of paperwork. When the bank employee finally left me alone with the box, my hands were shaking. Inside were documents, lots of documents, financial records, transaction, logs, photocopied checks, bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of, and photographs. Surveillance photos of men in expensive suits shaking hands outside office buildings, getting into cars, meeting in restaurants. Some of the faces I recognized from the news articles I'd read about Vincent's network. Others were complete strangers. But it was the last item in the box that made my blood run cold. A DVD labeled Insurance in Helena's handwriting. I took everything home and spent the afternoon going through it systematically. The financial records painted a picture of a money laundering operation that made David's real estate schemes look like petty theft. Millions of dollars flowing through. Shell companies, offshore accounts, legitimate businesses that existed solely to clean dirty money. The surveillance photos showed meetings between Vincent's associates and people I was starting to recognize as major political figures, union leaders, law enforcement officials. Helena hadn't just been married to a small-time criminal. She'd been living inside one of the largest corruption networks in the Midwest, documenting everything, building a case that could bring down judges, politicians, and police commissioners, along with the usual suspects. The DVD was the crown jewel. 2 hours of secretly recorded conversations, mostly between David and Vincent, discussing bribes, election tampering, contract killings, witness intimidation. Helena's voice appeared occasionally, asking innocent-sounding questions that prompted David to reveal more details. She'd been gathering evidence for years, not months, playing the role of devoted wife while systematically documenting her husband's crimes. No wonder Vincent wanted her dead. The contents of this safety deposit box could destroy dozens of powerful people, not just the handful who'd been prosecuted based on Helena's original testimony. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. As long as Helena was alive with access to this evidence, everyone in those photos and recordings was vulnerable, which meant Helena's story about a buyer willing to pay 7 figures for the information was probably true. There would be plenty of people eager to make sure this evidence disappeared permanently, and they'd pay whatever it took to ensure their own protection. But it also meant Helena was walking into a situation far more dangerous than she'd admitted in her letter. She wasn't just meeting with Vincent to hand over some financial records. She was carrying evidence that could topple government officials, and those kinds of people don't just write checks and shake hands when their freedom is at stake. I was still staring at the DVD when my phone rang. Unknown number, California area code. Marcus? The voice was unfamiliar, male, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Who is this? A friend of Helena's. She asked me to call you, let you know she's safe. Where is she? Somewhere secure. The negotiations are taking longer than expected, but everything is proceeding according to plan. What negotiations? Who are you? Someone who wants the same thing you do, for Helena to come out of this alive and free. But that's going to require some patience on your part. And trust. Trust you? I don't even know who you are. No, you don't. But Helena does. And she trusts me to handle this situation appropriately. That's going to have to be enough for now. The line went quiet, and I thought he'd hung up. Then he spoke again, and his tone was different. Harder, more direct. Marcus, I need you to listen very carefully. There are people looking for the evidence Helena collected. Not just Vincent's people. Federal agents, private contractors, individuals representing certain political interests. They know Helena had access to information beyond what she turned over during her original testimony, and they're going to start looking for anyone who might know where that information is stored. My mouth went dry. They're going to come after me. Possibly, probably. Helena mentioned that she gave you certain items for safekeeping. If that's true, then you're already more involved in this situation than either of you intended. I looked at the documents spread across my coffee table, the DVD sitting on top of the pile like a ticking bomb. What am I supposed to do? Now nothing. Don't contact anyone. Don't try to reach Helena. Don't go to the authorities. If anyone approaches you asking questions about Helena or about anything she might have given you, you know nothing. You were neighbors who occasionally shared a drink. That's it. And Helena? Helena is exactly where she needs to be, doing exactly what she needs to do. The less you know about the specifics, the safer you'll be if anyone decides to ask you questions. How do I know any of this is true? How do I know you're actually trying to help her? Another pause. Then, because if I wasn't trying to help her, you'd already be dead. The line went dead. I sat in my apartment for the next 3 hours, staring at Helena's evidence and trying to make sense of what was happening. The phone call had raised more questions than it had answered, but one thing was clear. I was no longer just Marcus, the 24-year-old neighbor who helped with groceries. I was Marcus, the person who had access to information that could destroy powerful people, which made me either a valuable asset or a dangerous liability depending on who was asking. The knock on my door came at 9:30 p.m. 2 men in dark suits, badges hanging from their belts, expressions that suggested they weren't here for a social call. Marcus Chen? The older one spoke, consulting a small notebook. FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your neighbor, Helena Martinez. I thought about the mystery caller's warning. If anyone approaches you asking questions, you know nothing. But these were federal agents, not Vincent's associates or political operatives. Weren't they supposed to be the good guys? What about her? I asked, not inviting them in. When was the last time you saw Ms. Martinez? Earlier this week. Wednesday, I think. Why? She's been reported missing by her employer. Apparently, she failed to show up for several important meetings and hasn't been responding to phone calls. Missing. Not under federal protection or cooperating with an ongoing investigation. Missing. I don't know anything about that, I said. We're just neighbors. We don't really keep track of each other's schedules. The younger agent stepped forward. Mr. Chen, we have reason to believe that Ms. Martinez was in possession of certain materials that could be relevant to an ongoing federal investigation. Materials that she might have shared with someone she trusted. I don't know what you're talking about. Documents, maybe. Computer files. Possibly stored in a safety deposit box or given to someone for safekeeping. They knew. Somehow, they knew. About the safety deposit box. About the evidence. About my involvement. Which meant either Helena had told them, or they'd been watching both of us longer than anyone had realized. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I helped Helena carry groceries a few times. We had wine and talked about normal stuff. Work, weather, whatever. I don't know anything about documents or investigations or federal materials. I'm a software programmer who fixes parking apps for a living. The older agent smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Mr. Chen, lying to federal agents is a serious crime. If you're protecting Ms. Martinez, or if you're withholding evidence related to a federal investigation, now would be a good time to cooperate with us. And if I'm not? If I genuinely don't know what you're talking about? Then you won't mind if we take a look around your apartment, just to clear things up. They had a warrant. Of course they had a warrant. 20 minutes later, they'd found everything. The documents from the safety deposit box, the DVD, Helena's letter, even the $25,000 check I'd been stupid enough to leave on my kitchen counter. They photographed everything, confiscated most of it, and left me with a business card and a warning about obstruction of justice. Ms. Martinez is in a lot of trouble, the older agent said as they prepared to leave. If she contacts you, if you hear from her in any way, you need to call us immediately, for her safety and yours. After they left, I sat in my ransacked apartment and tried to figure out what had just happened. The FBI knew about Helena's evidence cache, knew she'd given me access to it, and knew she was missing. But they didn't seem to know about Vincent, about the business deal, or about the mysterious phone call I'd received, which meant either Helena had lied to me about everything, or there were multiple groups of people playing games I didn't understand, and Helena was caught somewhere in the middle. My phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number that had called earlier. Sorry about the visit. Had to happen to maintain credibility. Trust the process. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I did something that probably wasn't smart, but felt necessary. I turned off my phone and went for a very long walk. When I got back 2 hours later, there was a woman sitting on the steps outside my building. Not Helena. This woman was younger, with short blonde hair and clothes that screamed federal agent even without the visible badge. Marcus Chen? She asked, standing as I approached. Let me guess. FBI? DEA, actually. Agent Sarah Rodriguez. We need to talk. I looked at her, then at my apartment building, then back at her. About Helena Martinez? About a lot more than that, I'm afraid. The situation has gotten complicated. Agent Sarah Rodriguez didn't wait for my permission to enter my building. She simply walked past me toward the lobby, clearly expecting me to follow. Everything about her radiated authority. The way she moved, the way she held her shoulders, the way she seemed to own whatever space she occupied. My apartment's been searched once today, I said, catching up to her at the elevator. I'm not really in the mood for round 2. This isn't a search, Mr. Chen. This is a conversation. Though I should mention that your cooperation would be appreciated by several different agencies who are suddenly very interested in your welfare. The elevator was broken again, so we took the stairs. Agent Rodriguez climbed without showing any signs of effort, her breathing steady and controlled. Former military, I guessed, or at least someone who took physical fitness seriously. DEA, I said as we reached my floor. Helena was involved with drug trafficking? Helena Martinez, or whatever her real name is, was involved with a lot of things. Drug trafficking just happens to be my particular area of expertise. She waited while I unlocked my apartment door, then surveyed the chaos the FBI had left behind with professional detachment. Couch cushions overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, books scattered across the floor. It looked like a tornado had hit, but Agent Rodriguez seemed unsurprised by the destruction. They were thorough, she said, settling into my desk chair without invitation. Find anything interesting? You'd have to ask them. I wasn't exactly invited to participate in the search. Marcus. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and fixed me with a stare that made me feel like I was being x-rayed. I'm going to level with you because I think you're in over your head and don't fully understand what's happening here. Your neighbor Helena Martinez has been under surveillance by multiple agencies for the past 6 months. Not because she's in witness protection, that ended years ago, but because she's been actively involved in activities that span several federal jurisdictions. I sat down on my overturned couch, trying to process what she was telling me. Activities like what? Money laundering, for starters. She's been using her consulting business as a front to clean money for at least 3 different criminal organizations. We've documented transactions totaling over $40 million in the past 2 years alone. The number hit me like a physical blow. $40 million. Helena, who worried about $30 olive oil and lived in a rental apartment in Riverside, had been laundering $40 million. That's impossible, I said. I've seen her tax returns, her bank statements. You've seen the ones she wanted you to see. Helena Martinez, and I'm using that name because it's the identity you know, not because it's her real one, is exceptionally good at maintaining multiple financial identities. The consulting business you know about generates maybe $200,000 a year in legitimate income. The money laundering operation generates considerably more. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed me photographs. Helena in business meetings with men I didn't recognize. Helena signing documents in offices that looked nothing like the modest consulting firm she described. Helena getting into expensive cars with license plates from multiple states. These photos were taken over the past 4 months, Rodriguez continued. Your girlfriend has been busy. She's not my girlfriend, I said automatically, then immediately regretted it. The correction made me sound defensive, and Agent Rodriguez's slight smile suggested she'd caught the implication. No, because the surveillance footage we have suggests otherwise. You've been spending a considerable amount of time in her apartment. Mr. Chen. Intimate time. Heat flooded my face. They'd been watching us. Watching our dinners, our conversations. Probably our kiss on the couch. Everything I'd thought was private had been documented by federal agents with cameras and recording. Equipment. How long? I asked. How long have we been watching? Since February. How long has she been using you? That's harder to pin down. Using me for what? Rodriguez set the tablet aside and leaned back in the chair. Helena needed someone with clean credentials, someone with no criminal history or suspicious associations, someone who could be trusted with sensitive materials if necessary. She also needed someone emotionally invested enough to protect her interests, but naive enough not to ask the right questions. The words stung because they rang true. I thought about all the times Helena had deflected my questions about her work, all the expensive gifts that had seemed generous, but now looked like payments for services. The wine, the dinners, the carefully cultivated intimacy. Had any of it been genuine? The safety deposit box, I said, was part of her insurance policy. Yes. She knew that if her current activities ever came to light, she'd need leverage. The evidence from her previous life, the corruption files, the recordings, the documentation of political payoffs, that's her get-out-of-jail-free card. As long as she has access to information that could destroy powerful people, she has protection. But the FBI confiscated everything. They confiscated copies. Helena's not stupid enough to keep all her insurance in one location. There are other safety deposit boxes, other hiding places, other people holding pieces of the puzzle. I thought about the mysterious phone call, the man who'd claimed to be Helena's friend. Other people like who? That's where things get complicated, Rodriguez said. Helena's been playing a very dangerous game, Marcus. She's been taking money from criminal organizations to launder their cash, while simultaneously collecting evidence that could be used against them. She's been maintaining relationships with federal agents who think she's a potential informant, while actively working to stay ahead of federal investigations. And she's been using legitimate relationships, like the one with you, to create cover for activities that could get her killed. Where is she now? We don't know. The last confirmed sighting was yesterday afternoon in San Francisco, getting into a car with Vincent Reyes. Since then, she's disappeared. Vincent's the one who contacted her. He said he had a buyer for the information she's been hiding. Rodriguez's expression sharpened. What exactly did she tell you about this buyer? I told her about Helena's letter, about the supposed 7-figure deal, about Helena's plan to sell the corruption evidence and disappear permanently. Rodriguez listened without interruption, but I could see her growing increasingly concerned. Marcus, she said when I finished, there is no buyer. Vincent Reyes has been in federal custody since Thursday morning. We arrested him on racketeering, charges based on evidence we've been gathering for months. The room felt like it was tilting. That's impossible. I saw them together. I saw Helena get into his car. You saw Helena get into a car with someone. But it wasn't Vincent Reyes. Rodriguez pulled up another photograph on her tablet. This one showed Vincent Reyes in handcuffs, being led out of what looked like an FBI building. The timestamp showed Thursday morning, hours before Helena's supposed meeting at Pier 39. Then who did she meet with? Someone who wanted Helena to believe she was meeting with Vincent. Someone who needed her to trust him enough to go with him voluntarily. The implications were staggering. Helena hadn't just walked into a dangerous business meeting. She'd been lured into a trap by someone impersonating Vincent Reyes. Someone who knew about the corruption evidence, knew about Helena's history, and knew exactly how to manipulate her into a vulnerable position. Who would do that? I asked. Someone with access to federal intelligence. Someone who knew about Helena's background and her current activities. Someone who could arrange for Vincent's arrest while maintaining the illusion that he was still free to make deals. Rodriguez was describing a conspiracy within the federal agencies themselves. Someone with official access to classified information had been using that access to set up Helena Martinez. You think it's someone in law enforcement? I think it's someone with significant resources and insider knowledge. Whether that's law enforcement, intelligence services, or private contractors working for political interests. That's what we're trying to determine. My phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number that had contacted me before. Package delivered. Cleanup in progress. Stay quiet. I showed the message to Rodriguez. She read it twice, then forwarded it to someone else before handing my phone back. How many times has this number contacted you? Twice. Once yesterday. Once just now. And you believed this person was working with Helena? He said he was. He knew things about the situation that suggested he was legitimate. Rodriguez stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the parking lot where Helena's BMW space had been empty for 2 days now. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Helena Martinez is either dead or she's in the custody of people who have every intention of killing her once they get what they want. The text messages you've been receiving are designed to keep you calm and cooperative while they clean up loose ends. Loose ends like me. Loose ends like you. The gravity of my situation was finally starting to sink in. I wasn't just a witness to Helena's disappearance. I was someone who had access to information that multiple parties wanted to control. The FBI had confiscated the evidence from the safety deposit box, but there were still people who didn't know exactly what I'd seen or who I might have told. What am I supposed to do? Officially? Cooperate with all federal agencies? Answer questions truthfully? And trust that the system will protect you? And unofficially? Rodriguez turned back from the window, and her expression was grim. Unofficially? Pack a bag and disappear for a while. Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't use credit cards. Don't contact friends or family. Just vanish until we can figure out who's running this operation and what they want. You're telling me to run. I'm telling you to survive. Helena thought she was smart enough to play multiple sides against each other, and now she's gone. You're not as experienced as she was, and you don't have her resources. Your best chance is to become a target that's too much trouble to find. Rodriguez headed for the door, then paused. There's one more thing. The $25,000 check Helena left you. Don't try to cash it. The account it's drawn on doesn't exist. It was part of the illusion, designed to make you believe her story about the big score she was planning to make. After she left, I sat in my destroyed apartment and tried to make sense of everything I'd learned. Helena wasn't the person I'd thought she was. The relationship I'd thought was developing between us had been at least partially manufactured. The evidence I'd found in the safety deposit box was real, but Helena's plan to sell it was fiction, and now someone was systematically eliminating everyone who knew about the corruption files, starting with Helena herself. The smart thing would be to follow Rodriguez's advice, pack a bag, empty my savings account, and disappear until the situation resolved itself. But there was something about the DEA agent's visit that bothered me. She'd known too much about Helena's activities, had too many specific details about surveillance and financial transactions, and she'd shown up awfully quickly after the FBI's search, almost like she'd been waiting for them to finish before making her approach. What if Rodriguez wasn't trying to help me? What if she was part of whatever conspiracy had led to Helena's disappearance? My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a text. Different number, different area code. Marcus Chen. The voice was female, older, with a slight southern accent. Who is this? My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm an attorney. Helena Martinez retained my services several months ago to handle certain legal matters in the event of her disappearance or death. Helena's dead? I don't know. But the circumstances surrounding her disappearance have triggered certain protocols she put in place. Protocols that involve you. What kind of protocols? The kind that require an in-person meeting. Are you familiar with the Riverside Public Library? Yes. Meet me there tomorrow at 2 p.m. Reference section, table by the windows. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this conversation. How do I know you're legitimate? Because Helena told me you'd ask that question, and she gave me a specific response. She said to tell you that the first time you helped her with groceries, she was testing whether you were the kind of person who would ask questions or just accept what you were told. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, trying to process this new development. Helena had retained an attorney. She'd put protocols in place for her disappearance. She'd given this Catherine Walsh specific information about our first meeting, suggesting she'd been planning for this possibility from the very beginning, which meant either Helena had been more paranoid than I'd realized, or she'd known exactly what kind of danger she was walking into when she got into that car with the fake Vincent Reyes. I looked around my ransacked apartment, at the chaos left behind by federal agents, at the evidence of a life that had become unrecognizable in the span of a few days. Helena Martinez had pulled me into a world of corruption, conspiracy, and federal investigations that I was completely unprepared to navigate. But she'd also left me breadcrumbs. The safety deposit box, the letter, and now this attorney who claimed to have instructions for what to do next. Maybe Helena had been manipulating me from the beginning, but maybe she'd also been trying to protect me. There was only one way to find out. I started packing a bag, but it did not disappear. I was going to that library meeting, and I was going to find out what Helena Martinez had really been planning all along, even if it killed me, which, given everything I'd learned in the past 48 hours, was becoming an increasingly likely possibility. The Riverside Public Library on Tuesday afternoon was exactly as mundane as you'd expect. Families with toddlers in the children's section, elderly patrons reading newspapers, college students hunched over laptops pretending to study. I found the reference section easily enough, but the woman sitting at the table by the windows wasn't what I'd expected from someone named Catherine Walsh. She was maybe 45, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and wearing jeans with a USC law school sweatshirt. She looked more like a soccer mom than a lawyer handling federal witness cases, which I supposed was probably the point. Marcus Chen? She asked as I approached her table. Catherine Walsh? Sit down. We don't have much time. I pulled out the chair across from her, noticing that she had a clear view of both entrances to the library and had positioned herself with her back to the wall. Professional paranoia or justified caution. Either way, it wasn't reassuring. Before we start, she said, I need to verify your identity. Helena told me you have a small scar on your left wrist from a childhood accident. I rolled up my sleeve, showing her the thin white line where I'd cut myself on a broken fence when I was 8. She nodded and opened a manila folder. Helena Martinez retained my services 6 months ago, Catherine began. She paid me a substantial retainer to handle what she called succession planning. Instructions for what to do with certain assets and information in the event of her death or disappearance. Assets like the corruption files, among other things. Helena was complicated, Marcus. I'm sure you've figured that out by now. She was simultaneously running from her past and profiting from it, which created a very precarious situation. Catherine pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Helena's handwriting. She asked me to give you this if she ever went missing for more than 72 hours. Inside was another letter, shorter than the first one, but somehow more personal. Marcus, if Catherine is reading this to you, then my gamble didn't pay off and I've probably run out of time. I'm sorry for lying to you about so many things, but I need you to know that the feelings between us were real. Everything else was complicated, but that part was simple. You're going to learn things about me that will make you question everything we shared. Don't. I was Helena Martinez when I was with you, even if that wasn't the whole truth. The woman who drank wine on your couch and helped you understand that life could be more than just existing. She was real. I've left you something that I hope will help you understand why I made the choices I did. Catherine has instructions for accessing it, but only if you want to. You don't owe me anything, Marcus. You never did. If you want to walk away from all of this and pretend we never met, I'll understand. But if you want to know who I really was and why I risked everything for a chance at a normal life with you, then trust Catherine. She's one of the few people in this mess who isn't working for someone else. I love you. I probably should have said that when I had the chance. Helena. I read the letter twice before looking up at Catherine, who was watching me with something that might have been sympathy. She's dead, isn't she? I asked. I don't know for certain, but Helena was very specific about the circumstances that would trigger these protocols. She expected that if she ever disappeared, it would be permanent. What did she leave me? Catherine hesitated. Before I answer that, I need to know what you want to do. Helena gave you an out, Marcus. You can walk away from this right now. I'll destroy her instructions. You'll never hear from any of us again, and you can go back to your life. What's the alternative? The alternative is that you become the custodian of information that powerful people will kill to suppress. You become a target for the rest of your life, unless you're very smart and very careful about how you handle what she's given you. I thought about Helena's apartment, about the expensive wine, and the careful way she'd arranged flowers in crystal vases. I thought about her laugh, about the way she'd touched my hand when she was trying to make a point, about the desperate intensity of that kiss on her couch. What did she leave me? I asked again. Catherine pulled out a key, different from the safety deposit box key, smaller and more modern, a storage unit in Los Angeles, Unit 247 at Secure Space on Wilshire Boulevard. Inside, you'll find the complete files that Helena collected over the years. Not just the Chicago corruption case, but documentation of criminal activities spanning multiple states and involving federal officials. Why me? Why not the FBI or the DEA or whoever's supposed to handle this kind of thing? Because Helena didn't trust any of them. She'd been approached by agents from multiple agencies, all claiming they wanted to help her, all asking for access to her files. But she could never be sure who was legitimate and who was working for the people she was hiding from. And she trusted me. She trusted you to make the right decision about what to do with the information. Not necessarily to follow some predetermined plan, but to think about what would actually serve justice rather than politics or personal agendas. Catherine stood up, preparing to leave. The storage unit is paid for through the end of the year. After that, the contents will be destroyed. Automatically. You have time to decide what you want to do. What would you do? I asked. She paused, considering the question. Helena believed that the only way to stay safe in this situation was to make herself too dangerous to kill. As long as she had information that could destroy powerful people, those people had an incentive to keep her alive. But that only works if they know you have the information and know you'll use it if anything happens to you. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about mutually assured destruction. Helena thought she could manage that balance indefinitely. She was wrong. But that doesn't mean the strategy is fundamentally flawed. It just means she underestimated how desperate her enemies had become. Catherine handed me a business card. If you decide to open that storage unit, call me first. Don't go alone, and don't trust anyone who approaches you claiming to represent official interests. At this point, you have no way of knowing who's legitimate and who's working for the conspiracy that killed Helena. After she left, I sat in the library for another hour, staring at the key and trying to decide what to do. Helena had given me a choice, but it didn't feel like much of a choice. Walk away and live with the knowledge that the people responsible for her death would never face consequences, or become a target myself by taking custody of the evidence that could bring them down. 3 days later, I drove to Los Angeles. The storage unit was in a nondescript building in mid-city, the kind of place where people keep furniture during moves or store Christmas decorations they never use. Unit 247 was climate-controlled and larger than I'd expected. Maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, filled with filing cabinets, boxes of documents, and what looked like a professional-grade server setup. Helena had been busy. The files were meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and digitized. Financial records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, email correspondence. Evidence of corruption spanning decades and involving dozens of high-level officials. It was enough to bring down senators, judges, cabinet members, and half the leadership of several federal agencies. But it was also enough to get me killed if the wrong people found out I had access to it. I spent 6 hours going through the files, trying to understand the scope of what Helena had documented. The Chicago network she'd originally exposed was just one tentacle of a much larger operation. Money laundering, election fraud, contract killings, witness intimidation, it was all there, documented with the kind of precision that suggested Helena had been gathering evidence for most of her adult life. At the bottom of the last filing cabinet, I found a DVD labeled "For Marcus." It was Helena, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've decided to see this through. I hope you understand what you're taking on. These files represent 20 years of my life, Marcus. 20 years of documenting crimes, gathering evidence, and trying to figure out how to use that information to protect myself and maybe do some good in the world. I failed. Obviously. But maybe you won't. You're smarter than I was, and you're not carrying the baggage of a criminal past. You have something I never had: credibility. People will believe you in ways they would never believe me. Don't try to be a hero. Don't think you can single-handedly bring down a conspiracy this large. But don't let these people win, either. Find a way to get this information to someone who can use it responsibly. There are still honest people in law enforcement, in journalism, in politics. Find them. Trust your instincts about who deserves the truth. And Marcus, thank you. For helping with groceries, for sharing wine and conversation, for making me remember what it felt like to be human, instead of just a witness in hiding. You gave me the best few months I'd had in years. That was worth everything that came after. I watched the recording 3 times before I made my decision. 6 months later, the story broke simultaneously in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. The Riverside Files, as they came to be known, documented the largest political corruption scandal in decades. The evidence Helena had gathered led to the indictment of 43 federal officials, the resignation of 2 cabinet members, and a complete overhaul of several government agencies. I never took credit for providing the information. The journalists who broke the story described their source only as a concerned citizen with access to materials related to federal corruption. They never mentioned Helena Martinez, never revealed how the evidence had been gathered, never connected the story to a woman who'd been murdered for trying to expose the truth. That was my choice. Helena deserved better than to be remembered as a criminal who got caught up in her own schemes. She deserved to be remembered as someone who risked everything for justice, even if she couldn't live to see it delivered. I still live in Riverside, still work in tech, still help neighbors with groceries when they need it. But I don't take relationships lightly anymore. I learned that people are more complicated than they appear, that love can coexist with deception. and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is care about someone whose life is built on secrets. Helena Martinez taught me that grocery bags tear at the worst possible moments, that $30 olive oil really does taste better than the cheap stuff, and that some whispers are worth the risk. She also taught me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. I miss her every day, and I'd make the same choice again, knowing how it would end. Some people are worth the whispers, worth the complications, worth the danger. Helena was one of them, even if that's not the name on her gravestone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.